Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Unseen Wisdom. As always, if you're enjoying these deep dives, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes.
Right.
We've got a really interesting one today. We're going to be taking a look at the recent resignation of Dr. Mbuyiseni Ndlozi from the economic freedom fighters.
Yeah, this is a story that's been making headlines, and for good reason. Ndlozi was a prominent member of the EFF, known for his powerful speeches and sharp intellect.
Exactly. And it was really his absence from their recent conference that first kind of sparked speculation that something was up. And then, of course, we had the bombshell announcement a few weeks ago.
And thanks to that exclusive interview he did with SABC News, we're finally starting to get some answers.
Right. Let's rewind a bit, though, because I think it's important to understand the context here. So Ndlozi's suspension from the EFF just weeks before that conference,
Yeah.
that was a huge red flag. I mean, he was accused of being a double agent, working for the ANC, conspiring with former EFF leaders, withholding information. These are not small accusations.
Absolutely not, especially within the context of South African politics. These allegations tap into a very sensitive history of betrayals and factionalism within liberation movements.
And Ndlozi, of course, denies these charges. He's calling the intelligence report that they used to justify suspending him a complete fabrication. But even while he's defending himself, he's also taking the opportunity to critique the EFF's leadership and their overall strategy.
Yeah, and that's where things get really interesting. He argues that the EFF's decision to align themselves with former President Zuma and the MK veterans backfired. It alienated a lot of potential voters, and he believes that contributed to their decline in the last election.
He's calling it the tactics of entanglement.
Interesting phrase.
He says that's what led to this decline in support, and he's essentially arguing that they've lost sight of the bigger picture. So yeah, it's a pretty scathing critique from someone who was, a key figure in the party.
Yeah, and it definitely raises questions about the compromises that movements sometimes make and whether those compromises end up betraying their core principles.
Right. And then the big announcement.
The bombshell.
He's leaving party politics altogether.
Yeah.
What do you think are the implications of this, both for the EFF and for South African politics more broadly?
Well, for the EFF, it's a major loss. They've lost one of their most articulate and prominent voices, and it remains to be seen whether the party will actually listen to his criticisms and, maybe try to course correct, or whether this just deepens the divisions that already exist within the EFF.
Right.
But zooming out a little bit to the broader political landscape, it's hard not to see this as a potential realignment in South African politics. I mean, Ndlozi's disillusionment with the EFF and then this unexpected praise he had for President Ramaphosa on certain issues, it suggests that he's willing to kind of challenge those traditional political boundaries.
You're right. His comments about Ramaphosa are really interesting. Ndlozi has been a pretty vocal critic of the president in the past, and now he's praising him for taking a strong stance on things like land expropriation and resisting Western pressure. It's definitely a shift.
Yeah, it is. And it kind of complicates that traditional left-wing view of Ramaphosa as being too accommodating to corporate interests. So could this be a sign of things to come, a kind of blurring of the lines between traditional political camps? I think it's something worth paying attention to.
So where does Ndlozi go from here? In the interview, he talks about moving towards academia, engaging in more public discourse, and maybe even creating a civil society organization that focuses on community development and research. He even cites AfriForum as an example of the kind of impact he's hoping to achieve.
Now, that's a really interesting point. You have Ndlozi, a champion of economic justice for Black South Africans, citing AfriForum, a group that's often seen as defending the interests of the white minority. It's a pretty jarring comparison. What do you think he sees in AfriForum that he wants to emulate? Is it their effectiveness, their organization, or is there something more to it?
Yeah, it's sparking a lot of debate. I mean, on the one hand, you could see it as him acknowledging their ability to mobilize their base and really influence public discourse. Those are aspects that he might want to incorporate into his own strategy for social change.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, drawing inspiration from a group that's seen by many as promoting an exclusionary vision of South Africa, that's bound to raise concerns.
Definitely a tightrope walk. He's going to have to be careful not to replicate those harmful elements, even unintentionally.
It sounds like he's stepping onto a very complex and potentially controversial path. We'll have to see how he navigates this new terrain as he moves into this world of civil society.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the complexities of social change, and even with the best intentions, how easy it is to kind of stumble into those ethical dilemmas.
And going back to his future plans, it makes you wonder how much influence he can really have outside of those traditional power structures. Do you think this move away from party politics could actually be a way for him to increase his impact in the long run?
It's a good question. Political parties obviously offer that direct route to policy engagement, but they also come with their own internal constraints and compromises. So by stepping outside of that system, maybe he's looking for a space where he can act with more autonomy and connect more directly with the people he wants to serve.
He talks about wanting to empower communities, focus on research and advocacy, and really build a movement from the ground up. It sounds like he's trying to tap into that same kind of grassroots energy that was so crucial in the anti-apartheid struggle.
Exactly. And that historical parallel is really important. Think about groups like the Treatment Action Campaign. They were instrumental in getting access to HIV/AIDS treatment in South Africa. They didn't have seats in parliament, but they had a huge impact on public health policy.
So it's like he's betting on the power of a different kind of platform, one that's built on direct engagement and really working with communities on the issues that matter most.
Right. And I think it speaks to this broader trend we're seeing globally, where people are becoming increasingly disillusioned with traditional politics and looking for different avenues to create change.
Like they're realizing that change doesn't always have to come from the top down.
Exactly. And Ndlozi's decision could be a signal of things to come. Maybe we'll see more people, especially those who came of age after apartheid, choosing to engage in different ways.
But let's be realistic. Moving away from party politics also comes with its own set of challenges. Civil society organizations often struggle with limited resources, and it can be hard to translate activism into concrete political wins.
For sure, sustaining any kind of movement takes more than just passion. You need organization resources and strategic planning. It'll be interesting to see how he tackles those challenges as he builds his own organization.
And speaking of challenges, let's circle back to that comparison he made with Afroforum. I mean, it's one thing to admire their effectiveness, but it's a whole other thing to replicate their model without falling into the same traps.
Absolutely. Afroforum has been successful partly because they've tapped into these anxieties within the Afrikaner community and often framed those concerns through a lens of racial grievance. And Ndlozi needs to be incredibly careful not to do the same thing.
Yeah, his challenge is going to be to build a movement that transcends those divisions and unites people across racial and economic lines. A movement that's truly inclusive.
And that's where his experience in the EFF could be both a help and a hindrance. I mean, he understands the complexities of South Africa and the deep inequalities that still exist, but he's also going to have to show that he's willing to move beyond that confrontational rhetoric that the EFF is sometimes known for and really focus on building bridges.
It's a tough balancing act, but one thing's for sure, Mele is someone who gets people talking. His actions, whether we agree with them or not, they force us to confront these crucial questions that South Africa is facing.
Exactly. And that's what makes the story so compelling. It's not just about one man's career choices, it's about the future of a nation and the ongoing struggle to create a society that lives up to those ideals of freedom, justice, and equality.
It's a reminder that the fight for a better world is never over.
Never over. It just takes on different forms and unfolds in unexpected ways.
And it demands that we keep challenging the status quo and pushing for change.
And ultimately, it's a story that asks each of us to look inward and think about our own role in shaping that future.
Yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it? Like, what is our role in all of this?
It does. And in Ndlozi's story, regardless of whether you agree with his choices, it highlights that we all have a part to play.
He's certainly shaking things up. Do you think he can actually succeed out there in the world of civil society? I mean, it's a tough road to travel.
It is. Building a movement from scratch is never easy. It takes a ton of work, resources organization, a clear vision. But, Ndlozi has shown that he can connect with people. He can articulate a message that resonates. Whether that translates into real change, well, that's the big question, isn't it?
It is. And one thing that really struck me throughout this whole saga is just how disillusioned he seems. Not just with the EFF leadership, but with the whole political system. Makes you wonder if that feeling is more common than we realize.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, we see it all over the world, right? This decline in trust in institutions, the feeling that the old ways of doing things just aren't working anymore. People are hungry for something different, for leaders who are willing to actually challenge the status quo and offer real solutions.
So maybe Ndlozi stepping outside the system is a sign of what's to come. Maybe we'll see more people, especially the younger generation, choosing to engage with social change in new and different ways.
It's definitely possible, and it raises some really interesting questions about the future of politics, both in South Africa and globally. Will we see a shift towards more grassroots, community-driven activism? What role will technology play in all of this?
Those are questions we'll be exploring more here on The Unseen Wisdom. But for now, we want to hear from you, our listeners.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Ndlozi's decision? Do you think he made the right call? What do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities for those who are fighting for a better South Africa?
Let us know in the comments below. We're always eager to hear your perspectives and keep the conversation going.
This has been a truly fascinating deep dive, one that's taken us beyond the headlines and into some really complex issues. From political strategy and the role of civil society to the ongoing struggle for racial and economic justice in South Africa, Ndlozi's story has given us a lot to think about.
It really has.
Okay.
And it reminds us that the fight for a more just and equitable world is a constant work in progress.
A journey that demands our attention, our engagement, and our willingness to challenge the status quo.
Well, thanks for joining us on The Unseen Wisdom. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the stories and ideas that shape our world. Until then, keep seeking out that unseen wisdom hiding in plain sight. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes.